Hi, my name is Vikram from a company called KotahiNet. I've got no PowerPoint presentations, partly because I'm lazy and partly because it's really easy to throw up some images and some data, but we miss the stories, we miss some of that. So just have a bit of a break with no PowerPoints. And I want to talk to you a little bit about us and share a story with you which I hope will help draw out some of the insights that people are looking for. So the company that is called KotahiNet. We're based in Wellington. Kotahi comes from the Maori word kotai, which means the one. So we will be the one, as in the one ring rules them all. We're an IoT company, an Internet of Things company, and I suspect that you've heard that term quite a few times today and yesterday and still have no idea what it means. And that's fine, it's an early stage. Many of us hadn't heard of cloud computing, and when we first heard of cloud computing, we couldn't quite figure out what the cloud had to do with computing. And so it's one of those technologies that will, over time, we'll get to know more about it, we get better understanding. The way we tend to explain it is there's three steps. There's sensing the physical world, there is understanding the data that we get from sensing, and then there's acting on that data. So on our website, we tend to say we're an IoT company, and what that actually means is we sense, we understand, and we act. Similar to that, we've got three parts to our business. We've got a wireless network that runs across New Zealand. It's, as you've heard the term a few times, LoRaWAN. It's purpose-built for getting data from sensors and devices. So here is one simple example of a device. It's got a battery. This device can communicate 30 kilometers line of sight, a couple of kilometers in town. The battery will last 5 years. But the network can't do voice, it can't do video, it can't do pictures, it can't do text messages. All it does is it's purpose-built for data messaging. So unlike a lot of other people, we've actually built our network. It's commercially working across New Zealand. We've got happy paying customers, so it's not experimental. It actually does work. The second part of our business is around hardware and sensors. So while we try and supply and encourage people to buy from the global market because it's a global standard, we've also got one device where, particularly for people who manufacture sensors, it allows for any digital, analog, or pulse input and transmit. But what people really want, most people besides the network and hardware, is, so what do I do with this data? They want a complete solution. And so I wanted to talk about that part of the business a little bit, the mistakes that we made, the lesson that we learned, and what I think are a couple of insights that as you see numbers and things that we just can't process in our mind. You know, what does 25 billion or 50 billion devices actually mean? It's something that we just can't relate to. It's difficult to process that. What does it actually mean to have terabytes and megabytes of data? So these are all difficult concepts to process. But what I wanted to talk about was our story around level monitoring. So this is an ultrasonic sensor, right, small little thing. Put it on top of a tank or a silo, and it sends out sound waves, and then based on the reflection, you can calculate the level of anything in a tank, whether it's a liquid in a tank or a solid, like anything solid in a tank. And that connects to a simple sensor, and this communicates to our network. So it's very simple. You put that on top of a tank or a silo, and you get data. So we thought that's pretty cool. Went to a couple of farmers, and I'll stick to agri today. So we went to a couple of farmers and said, hey, we got this really great tank level monitor. Don't you want to know the level of water in your tanks? And they said, no, don't quite want that. We don't want data. So that was the first thing that we learned as we went out and tried to market this and market new concepts, was yes, farmers want solutions, but they actually don't want more data. What they want is insights from the data. They are time poor, they want to make decisions from the data. The second thing that we learned was, as a small company, it's really hard for us to do one-on-one conversations with farmers and try and scale our business. So yes, it's lovely that we had a few farming friends and they gave us time and they put up our stuff, but the feedback was, this isn't quite working for us. And it wasn't working for us as a company, because we just simply are not going to have the scale and the ability to go out and have these individual conversations with each farmer one by one. So we start looking at what are channels to market. So how do we provide solutions that, the first step obviously has to be something that the farmer values. The second step has to be, how do we scale as a small company, how do we scale across New Zealand, how do we scale globally. So back to the drawing board, and had a lot of conversations, had a lot of discussions, and then we found that there actually is one problem that people are willing to pay us to solve, and that is around animal feed management. So the same sensor, the same setup can be put on top of a silo, just like the one that there's here one outside, you know, the one big green thing. It's the animal feed silo. At the moment, farmers, if they have to figure out how much of feed they have in a silo, they literally do climb to the top of the silo, open it and use a torch or bang the side. Most farmers have a pretty good idea of how much feed they have in their tank, because mentally they've got thumb rules. 3 kgs per cow from approximately May to approximately December. So if you multiply that by how many cows there are on a farm, they've got a reasonably good idea of how much feed they have. So the bigger problem is not how much feed, but ordering new feed. So the process, the way it works at the moment, is that the farmer would call the animal feed supplier and say, come and deliver feed. And farmers being farmers, and this is the way it always goes, is often it's an emergency, often it's like, I need it now, and the feed supplier has the problem of being able to schedule it and supply feed as soon as the farmer demands it. The feed supplier also is interesting because it's a competitive market, and once a farmer signs up to an animal feed supplier for a season, that's pretty much it. The farmer is not going to change, right? So it's difficult for the feed supplier to win new customers. So when you start thinking about this, you start thinking that actually the customer shouldn't be the farmer, it should be the feed supplier. Because the feed supplier has the problem. The feed supplier has the opportunity to win new business by providing greater service. So that sounded much more promising to us. So we went and spoke to a couple of feed suppliers, and luckily there was one particular company in Palmerston North who could see where we were coming from. And they were a really good customer to start with, because they had already got sensors in silos, but the sensors weren't working for them. So our conversation with the feed supplier was more around reliably understanding the level in a tank and communicating that over long distances, which is our specialty, because they had already known that they could win businesses and give better service. So we're working on that, and I think one of the insights that we're getting are not quite exactly what we expected. So the first order of benefits is quite clear. So you get a farmer, the feed supplier pays to get the sensor and install it on the silo, on the feed silo. And the farmer likes that because they don't have to pay for it, so that's lovely. But the farmer gets to see on an app on their phone what is the level of animal feed left in their silo. And the feed supplier gets to see that same information. So there's a lot more visibility. So that's what I call a first order benefit, or the small data of IoT, which is you can actually see and get visibility of the actual date of how much feed there is in a silo. And the feed supplier can then look at that and plan out and schedule. So that's a second order benefit. So what has happened now is that the feed supplier can start understanding when they have to supply the farmer. So they can schedule in and say, okay, in 3 days' time, I've got to send so many tons there, I've got to send so many tons there, and they can start optimizing their logistic costs. So now the opportunity is for the feed supplier, no more emergency calls. It's all about scheduling in with their truck supplier and their own production. So they've got a second order benefit of not only have they got a happy farmer, they've reduced their own costs and are competing because now farmers are actively saying, I'm getting better service and I'm getting better quality from this particular feed supplier, so I'm going to switch to this person. And so the second order benefit is changing the problem from the farmer's problem to order feed to becoming the feed supplier's problem to make sure that the farmer has sufficient feed. And all of them win in the same way. But then there's a third order of benefits, which was something that only came up once we got underway with this, which was that the feed supplier now has a really good understanding of, they've got 700 customers, when and how much do they need, so they can optimize their own supply chain to make sure, because they get ingredients from many different places, and there's a lot of different ingredients that go into animal feed. And at the moment, with this particular person that we're working with, about 50% of his sale is sort of like a standardized, customized, and 50% are individually tailored solutions for each farmer, which is quite typical in this industry. So the supplier can now optimize when they get and how much they order. And their biggest problem as a medium-sized supplier of animal feed was the capital that they had locked up in the feed supplies. So now they can optimize that. So that's what I call a third order of benefits. So to us, it's been a really interesting journey. And this is just one small example of many other things that we do. But I wanted to share this because I think when you start getting into a little bit of detail, you start uncovering what does IoT actually mean? Why do we get data? Why do we connect things to the internet? What do we do with that data? And then most importantly, what are the benefits at a business level? And it isn't as simple as, oh, we get better visibility of how much animal feed there is in our silo. There are real business benefits that flow on from that. So that's pretty much it. Just a story, one of the small examples. Hopefully it's given you a flavor of why we do what we do. And if you have any questions, happy to take them.
From when you pitched your idea of measuring the amount of water in the tank for farmers to the feedback that actually that's not what the farmers needed in the pivot, how long did that take you to make that pivot to being then a feed management system?
So the question is, how long did it take us to pivot? It's not as simple as that was the only thing that we were doing. It was almost, we've got different focuses in different areas. And we learned with the tank level monitor very quickly, the main lesson that we learned very quickly was we cannot market direct to farmers. That was an absolute takeaway. That we just don't have the scale, we don't have the ability to go and work. So a lot of other suppliers and a lot of other people were all very focused on the farmer and making it easy for the farmer. And that might work for a large company, but it will kill us as a small company. It was sort of then just on a back burner, and we were doing other things and now doing other things, and it came together as an idea when I went to visit some of the farms, and we have these conversations with farmers. And then one of the farmers mentioned, I've got this feed, and this is, describe to me what they do. And that started crystallizing the idea of that, and then we spoke to feed manufacturers. So it's just a process of thinking through, not quite this is the only thing we do, so if that hasn't worked, let's try something new. Didn't quite work like that.
Vikram, what's the coverage of your network?
Yeah, it's a good point in the sense that, so we, as a network, we started with covering the cities. Top 10 cities, drew a line. In 6 weeks, we rolled out across the cities. Now we're rolling across the regions. And we've rolled out across Wairarapa, we're rolling out now across mid-Canterbury. But I think what I've realized is that these types, IoT is different from internet access networks. And the why it's different is because in internet access networks, once you provide internet access to a farmer or rural areas, people know what to do with the internet. Right? They just want access. And so the biggest issue is whether it's RBI or UFB or whatever, it's just giving access. But if we give people access to an IoT network, that isn't sufficient. What they need is sensors, they need data, and they need all of that stuff. And so increasingly us and many other people around the world, but I think only us in New Zealand, are promoting these networks as, think of it more like Wi-Fi networks, particularly in rural and remote areas. So if you can have a Wi-Fi network for your internet access, think of having a Wi-Fi on steroids for your local area for sensors. And if we do that bottom up and combine that with top down, we will get true national 100% coverage. But if we don't do it that way, we will continue to do what we have with the cellular networks, which is we will have pockets of coverage, and we will have lots and lots of farms in rural areas which do not have these coverages. So we're definitely working with, the costs have come down quite a bit, and it's now closer to something like $200 or $300 for people to put up their own LoRa network, and then we look after the back end of data management. Because like I say, it absolutely isn't sufficient to just set up one of these IoT networks, and it just doesn't work on its own like an internet network. Cool, anyone else?
Are there limitations on the number of sensors you could hook up? I mean, what are your kind of bandwidth, if that's the right nomenclature there? What scale are we talking as far as the data transmission?
So it's like going back to the dial-up days, if you remember what those days were, right? Just think of one of these sensors, right? What does it do? It sleeps for 59 minutes, does nothing, wakes up, takes a reading of how much space there is in a tank, transmits it, and goes back to sleep. That's all it does. That's why the battery lasts so long. And the data that it sends, the median size of a data message on our network is around 12 bytes. Bytes, it's real small. Right? So on one of our gateways, you could probably have 10 to 20,000 sensors. On the smallest Wi-Fi type, small box, you'd probably get a few thousand. So the number of sensors and the bandwidth isn't a problem at all. Very, very small. Yeah.
So what, I mean, it's going back to say like the really small payload, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you say then you're excluding like the potential application around robotics? I mean, if there is information going back to the host or,
The physics and radio requirements means trade-offs have to be made. So cellular networks are really good at high bandwidth, like robotics, connected cars, but they are very power hungry, and that is why your battery on your cell phone will only last a day. Wi-Fi is somewhat similar, great for video, but actually very power hungry. So these networks have made a conscious trade-off to get very long distance, 30 kilometers, with a battery lasting 5 to 10 years. But the trade-off is very small messages. Lots of messages, but very small messages. So it depends on what you want to do. Connected cars and robotics, absolutely use something like cellular Wi-Fi. But if you want to use farm type long distance, these are perfect networks for that. Yeah.
What's your strategy around integration? I mean, obviously, farmers are collecting a huge amount of information from different sources, and this could be part of that.
Yeah. Our experience has been there's two distinct categories. One is for people who want the data and have already got systems that they can use to store, integrate, particularly if you want to integrate with other data streams. In that case, the simplest thing is to provide data in an open format. There's a format called JSON, which everyone uses. It's provided in a JSON structure and people can interpret it. The other segment is when people don't actually care about the data, they want the data to be visualized or processed in some way. So we do that in that case. And that's been the experience, that it's either you want to integrate with existing systems or provide solutions end to end. Okay? Cool, thank you very much.